Hello again, welcome back to part 2 of the Calamity 1 block series. If you thought the chaos ended in the last video, well, it's only just beginning. Anyways, let's get started. I started out hard mode by, can you guess it? That's right, mining. So much mining. Once I finished mining, I went back over to the black market dealer to get myself enough titanium to craft a full set of armor and tools. And after those were crafted, I headed underground to make a quick little mob farm, which was actually much easier than it would be in normal playthroughs. The main reason is because in normal playthroughs, you have to deal with mobs coming at you from all angles, but in the one block playthrough, it's either left or right. Anyway, after finishing that and messing with some settings in the quality of life mod, I started the fight against the Destroyer, to which I quickly realized that this neat little arena I built in free hard mode is just not going to cut it for these future bosses. I can't expand downwards due to the jungle biome and mushroom biome I built being in the way, so that means the only other option is to build right beside it. So I started working on the mega arena that I end up using for the rest of this playthrough. Building this arena was a lot more painful than it might look at first. For starters, the mobs, they are so annoying. Because there aren't any caves for the mobs to get stuck in, they all spawn on the platforms, which leads to me needing to fight off 50 skeletons within the span of like 2 seconds. Another thing, sometimes when placing the insta-bridge, even though it's all lined up and everything, it just goes the other way. Like, why? What causes that? And because I'm not going to leave one platform going in the opposite direction, I have to break every single bit of it before I continue working on the arena again. This happened not once, but twice, and I don't know what caused it either time. Once I finished placing the platforms, I added some pearl stone at the ends. I don't really remember why I did it, but placing the pearl stone at the ends made me realize that half of these platforms are one block off. Am I gonna fix it? No, I'm not. You're gonna have to deal with that for the rest of this entire playthrough. After that, I lit up the arena and fought some of the mechanical bosses right after, starting with the twins. On the first attempt, I brought Spasmatism to its second phase and managed to bring Stretnacer to its second phase as well, but that didn't last too long as I then proceeded to get instantly vaporized by Spasmatism. Next up, I tried the Destroyer fight. I was actually making really good progress, so much so that I was starting to think that I might actually beat the Destroyer first try, ignoring the other attempts. And so, after bringing the Destroyer's health all the way down, I didn't win. The Destroyer did in fact end up destroying me. The fight after that against Skeletron Prime was just... Out of all the mech bosses, since I made it the farthest fighting the twins, I decided to start fighting them first. Second attempt making it farther than the first, nearly killing Retinazer but dying shortly after. I also ended up trying even more boss fights in between everything, farming the Wall of Flesh, dying to Cryogen, building an artificial brimstone crag biome, and dying to Cryogen some more. It was also around this time where I decided to go from melee to mage, just to change it up a bit since all of my previous Calamity playthroughs have been using melee weapons. I did keep my melee setup in a different loadout just in case I ever wanted to switch back to it, but I do end up using this less and less as the playthrough goes on. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, dying. After dying to the twins for the 4th time, I set my sights on a new weapon that could potentially help me beat the twins. I first tried using the Clothier's Wrath, which didn't really work too well, so I set my sights on a different weapon. That weapon in question being the Poseidon, as I wanted something that could more easily home in on the twins. And after creating an artificial sunken sea biome, and fighting a giant clam, I managed to get it on the first try. However, instead of actually using the weapon, I read about a different weapon on the wiki called the Serpentine, which seemed like a much better option than the Poseidon, so I went all the way back down to the sunken sea biome, fought a sea serpent, and got that weapon as well on my very first try. I also made myself a few other spellbooks and tried them out on some bosses. Since my new weapons worked out so well against the Destroyer and Cryogen, I tried them out on the twins as well, and here's what happened. After defeating the twins, I then fought Skeletron Prime next, and I then realized just how well the Poseidon does against this boss, easily targeting each of the hands one by one so I can focus on dodging. Last and definitely least, we have the Destroyer, which was, yeah, quite a bit more difficult than the rest of the mechanical bosses. I struggled with that fight so much, in fact, that I resorted to cheese. How did I cheese the Destroyer, you might be wondering? Well, since I made this entire world so flat when I was building it, if I get a projectile that can fly infinitely, I could shoot the Destroyer from halfway across the entire map without taking any damage in the process. I still ended up dying multiple times trying this strategy, because I didn't have anything like a magic conch to teleport me, so I had to use manual teleportation potions, which quite a few times led to me teleporting directly inside the Destroyer, taking loads of damage. Despite all the failures, I still managed to pull through, and after a few attempts, the jungle now grows restless. But first, Queen Slime. Okay, never mind. Instead, I went for Cryogen. I instead went for Cryogen, and I was able to defeat him with no problems whatsoever. With Cryogen defeated, I unlocked the Archmage, and I ended up getting the Cryophobia weapon as well as Permafrost Concoction. And now that I have the Cryophobia, I could easily fill up the entire screen with projectiles, which led to me easily beating Queen Slime after some time. Once Queen Slime was defeated, I set my sights on fighting the Aquatic Scourge next. The only problem being that I literally have no Sulfurous Sea, and while I could make the summon item and fight the Scourge anyways, I would prefer to actually have, you know, a solid ground to stand on, so I started building an area for the Sulfurous Sea. It took a while to fill up with water, but after finishing the base of the sea as well as finishing filling it up, I summoned the Aquatic Scourge. First attempt, I was making really good progress, bringing it all the way down to 30,000 HP, but then I started messing up some more. I ran into one too many projectiles and ended up dead. Second attempt, I got circled Slither.io style and died shortly after. Third attempt was honestly just bad, but the fourth attempt, however, right after the Aquatic Scourge was defeated, I did the second tier of the Acid Raid event, not getting any useful loot from it, but oh well. Next up, the Brimstone Elemental. I made pretty decent progress, but died quite a few times. I also fought the Calamitous clone, mainly just to see how hard that fight would be after I fought the rest of these bosses, and it was surprisingly not too bad. I made it all the way through the first bullet hell and to the phase with the brothers, and shortly after did end up dying to them, but still, getting Calamitous down to 40% health on a first try is pretty good. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah, fighting the Brimstone Elemental. It took quite a few more tries compared to the rest of these bosses, but I was eventually able to take her down. With the Brimstone Elemental finally down, it was time to face the Calamitous clone. First parts of the fight were pretty easy, just hit, dodge, hit some more, dodge a bullet hell, and hit even more, but when it got to the brothers phase, I kept on dying over and over. Because I was still struggling with the Calamitous clone, I went for Plantera instead, turning my giant arena into a jungle arena with the jungle fountains that I got from the Witch Doctor. I realized that Plantera's hook doesn't attach to the platforms for whatever reason, so after that first failure, I placed walls all along my arena so it wasn't limited to fighting on the edges of it. Does it look good? Absolutely not, but it sure does get the job done, and that's what matters. Giving myself more mobility does not help the fact that I am still bad at this game, leading to me dying over and over and over and over again. After those deaths, I did a mix of fighting Calamitous, then Plantera, then Calamitous, then Plantera, Calamitous, Plantera, Calamitous, Plantera, Calamitous, Plantera, Calamitous. For those unaware, around a year ago, I had been doing a no-hit run, and the Calamitous clone caused me so much pain trying to no-hit it in death mode. I accumulated over 1.2 thousand attempts before I defeated it. Well, as these fights continued, me dying over and over, this was beginning to feel like that no-hit fight all over again. Me dying with no end in sight. Until... Although Plantera also took a few more tries, she ended up falling very soon after I defeated Calamitous. Next up, Golem, and well, I was doing a lot worse than I thought I would against a sentient pebble with the IQ of a jellyfish. To distract myself from my ever-increasing self-doubt in my Terraria abilities, I started working on a build for the ocean. I wanted to make it look as natural as a floating ocean might look like, so I just placed a bunch of blocks until I got this design, which I think is pretty cool. The thing that took the longest once again was actually filling in the water, which even though it took a while, I'd say it turned out pretty well. I also started working on a spot for the Astral Infection, mainly due to the fact that when I beat the Wall of Flesh, the Astral Infection never even ended up spawning in the first place. My idea for this build was to have some sort of meteor crater leading to an island right below it containing the Astral Infection. After a few revisions to the base outline, I began working on filling in the interior of the island, where I also added these little spike things on the bottom as well. I kinda wanted to make them look like astral roots that were the only thing keeping this island afloat, but I don't know how well I did that. Oh well, I'd say it looks pretty decent. While building the island, I also collected so much Stardust during this whole thing. Not really a bad thing or anything like that, I just felt like pointing that out. Once I finished filling in the interior, I also added some extra hills on the island, just so I didn't look as flat on the top. Now that all of the building is out of the way, it's back to fighting some bosses, where I first did a mix of fighting Golem and Anahita and Leviathan, but after briefly summoning Astromarius and realizing just how easy fighting him on an entirely flat world is, I just went for Astro instead. Since I was able to basically cheese this entire fight, it didn't take long whatsoever. Although the fight itself didn't take that long, there was something else that it took so much longer. I read on the wiki that Astromarius drops a specific magic weapon, and on the wiki it seemed like it might help me against some of these bosses. That weapon in question being the Aluva Astralis? Am I pronouncing that right? No idea. Anyway, this took me a lot longer to get compared to the length of the original fight. Funny thing is, after getting this weapon and trying it out on Golem, it wasn't even that good. I literally just ended up using the Tears of Heaven on Golem since that actually, you know, did good damage. I was getting closer and closer with each attempt, and although I was dealing pretty good damage, Golem was unfortunately dealing a lot more damage in return, leading to me dying once again. I then ended up briefly switching back to melee, using the Blighted Cleaver as my weapon of choice against Golem, which worked a lot better. After I defeated Golem, I don't really need to explain it, do I? 45 minutes of mining later, and I started doing a mix of fighting all the late hard mode bosses. And because I don't really feel like explaining what happened on every single one, here's a little compilation of everything. With the cultist defeated, I now had access to the pillars. I started with the solar pillar. Since I was still occasionally using melee along with the mage class, I wanted to get the daybreak. Vortex right after was really easy, Stardust was even easier, and Nebula was, as always, pretty easy. When Moon Lord arrived, I didn't want to beat him right away as I still had some bosses left, so I mainly fought him just to see how far I could make it, and I made it pretty far, taking down both of the hands before I ended up dying to the eyes right after. Now that I have weapons from the pillars, I was able to easily beat quite a few of the remaining bosses first try, without any problems whatsoever. Yep, first try. Definitely first try. 100% first try. One boss that I was still struggling with, however, was Astrodeus. With the amount of health that boss has and the amount of damage I'm dealing in return, this was not fun at all. I tried multiple different weapons, but I couldn't find anything that would deal damage that was consistent, as well as just being decent in general. Even after defeating Duke Fishron and the Empress for that little bit of extra gear, I was still struggling quite a bit against this boss. That is, until I heard about this neat little weapon called the Charged Blaster Cannon. For those who don't know why this weapon would work way too well against this boss, it fires a death laser that pierces infinitely, and well, infinite pierce paired with a worm boss that has many separate damageable segments gets you, well, With my new, insanely busted weapon, I continued fighting Astrodeus, still dying quite a bit, but eventually I was able to line up the laser just right to defeat the boss. After that fight, I quickly lit up the other side of my arena and fought the Plaguebringer a few times until I won and then summoned the Ravager. The Ravager was yet another boss I struggled a lot with in the early parts of the fight, dying over and over, but eventually I was able to make it through those early parts, and well, the rest of the fight wasn't nearly as bad. The Ravager's defeat marks the last boss I need to defeat before Moon Lord, so without further ado, it's time to fight the last boss of hard mode, the Moon Lord. Well, now that Moonlord's been defeated, I guess that marks the end of part 2 of the One Block playthrough. Real quick, I just wanted to thank everybody for the support of the first part of this series, or the fact that it's at 85,000 views as of writing this is insane. I honestly never even thought it would get anywhere close to that. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the second part, and well, yeah, see you in the next one. Hey, you yawning. Oh, yeah. Oh, yep, nope, yep, yeah.